Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Shantytown. This is a 3-cost action card from Intrigue, and it says +2 actions, reveal your hand. If you have no action cards in hand, +2 cards. So straight away, if you know anything about Dominion, you'll realise there's a bit of an awkward contradiction in this card. So it's clearly a village, and the more traditional villages, you want to pair them up with many action cards so that you actually make use of the +2 actions that it's giving you. Because if you play a regular village and you don't actually spend all of your actions, then that village was a bit of a waste. It didn't really do anything for you. You got that resource of plus action and you didn't spend it. Now Shantytown is giving you this strong benefit of +2 cards if you don't pair it up with any other action cards. And if it is paired up with action cards, then you actually don't draw anything at all, which is worse than regular village. So you've got this dichotomy between wanting to pair it up with other action cards because it's giving you +2 actions, and not pairing it up with other action cards because then you get some extra draw as well on top, and drawing cards is pretty good. So what do we do about this? Well, the harsh reality is that Shantytown is pretty weak. There's a lot of decks where you have a high density of action cards because that's the right thing to do, and in those sorts of decks it's very, very difficult to get Shantytown to actually draw you any cards. Most of the time you are going to pair it up with other action cards, and it's just not going to draw, and that makes it worse than regular village. And that's just the way it's going to be, right? If you are playing a regular engines type deck and you're just never drawing cards from Shantytown and you're thinking, man, I must be doing something wrong, then the truth is that you might not actually be doing anything wrong at all. It just is the case that Shantytown will be that way a lot of the time. Now, it's still a village. Villages are pretty good. They give you fairly strong effect of playing lots more terminal actions. So it's not the end of the world for Shantytown, but it's a non-drawing village. It's pretty bad village, basically, as far as villages go. So if you have this sort of deck where you are expecting to not get any draw from Shantytown, then, as I said before, it's going to be worse than most other villages. Now, it does cost 3. That is cheaper. A lot of villages cost around about 4. Some do cost 3. Regular village is better than Shantytown, despite costing 3 in this scenario where Shantytown won't draw you anything. So you might get some Shantytown sometimes just because there are other villages at 4 and you've only got 3 to spend this turn and you just want a village, right? Or it could just be that actually you have no choice. If you want a village, you've only got Shantytown to pick from, or all the other villages have gone and you still need more villages. Well, Shantytown's there for you, even though it's worse. Sometimes you just want the village effect. We've talked about Festival in the base game, and as we discussed in that video, Festival makes it a lot harder to actually draw your deck. The +1 card on the regular village is actually pretty good. Without it, Terminal Draw particularly kind of gets a lot worse. You sort of downgraded a tier, so Smithy sort of becomes similar to going for regular village plus Moat, right? It's a lot worse in many ways. And with Moat-like draw, so this includes cards like Courtyard as well, Shantytown, it's almost pointless to build a draw engine with Moat if your village is Shantytown. You won't actually get anywhere. This is what we call spinning your wheels in Dominion, or just, in general. And it means that you'll be buying all of these action cards and playing all these Shantytowns and Moats, and what you have to show for it at the end is a 5-card hand that would have been exactly the same if you just simply hadn't bought any of those action cards at all. Now, with Festival, at the very least, if you do this, you are generating money and buys, so it can be worth it to try, like a Festival Moat deck, even though your hand size doesn't really go up. But with Shantytown, it really is completely pointless doing this. There is no point at all in building an engine with Shantytown and Moat if you're not expecting Shantytown to ever actually give you any draw at all. Now, if Shantytown works, it does actually draw, then that's the same as playing a laboratory and a regular village. We call this effect of 2 actions and 2 cards a Lost City effect, because there is a card in Adventures called Lost City, which does exactly that. And you'll be getting this effect for 3 money, and this is an absolute bargain, because that sort of effect will normally cost like 5 or even 6, and so getting it for 3 is like really, really cheap. But that's when it works, right? And getting this to work consistently is very difficult with Shantytown. It requires support in order to do it, and even then, it's not actually going to work all of the time. It is very, very hard to get Shantytown to actually give you this draw a bunch of the time. And one of the main problems that Shantytown has is that it anti-synergizes with itself. So Shantytown is an action. That means if you draw 2 Shantytowns into the same hand, then one of those Shantytowns simply isn't going to draw because the other Shantytown gets in its way. It blocks the other one from drawing. And so if you do have, say you have a hand with just 2 Shantytowns, you play one of them and you get no draw, and then you play the next one and you draw 2 cards. Well, that's sort of similar to both of those Shantytowns had just been a regular village, right? You end up with gaining 3 actions overall, or you have 3 actions left or whatever, and you have a 2-card hand size, just like you would have had with 2 regular villages. If you draw more than 2 Shantytowns together, then it starts to get real bad if you are hoping to use them for draw, because you're, just a whole load of them, all but the last one, potentially, aren't going to draw you anything at all. So you don't always actually want to have that many Shantytowns. If you start loading your deck with lots of Shantytowns, they will just trip over each other. So first of all, you might think to yourself, well, okay, what if I just had very, very few action cards at all? So in theory, you think to yourself, if I had barely any actions, then odds are pretty good that my Shantytown won't find another action, I'll get to draw with it. Like, imagine that you had only 20% of your deck be action cards, then hey, look, 1 in 5, right? I'm a 5-card hand, I might get 4 non-actions and a Shantytown, so I get to draw, right? But the problem is that if you do collide, especially with some sort of terminal, like say you had a workshop to gain these Shantytowns with or whatever, then that Shantytown might end up being completely useless. So if you have a hand which has 1 Shantytown and 1 terminal action, and then like the other 3 are some sort of non-action, then you don't necessarily get to actually play the Shantytown, or you can, but it's basically not going to do anything. You're not going to use both the actions, and you didn't get a chance to draw. So Shantytown actually tends to be pretty bad if the action density is really low. It's sort of acting as a possible laboratory with a failure chance, and that's not good. Like, if you think about Moat and Big Money, like a strategy, that's really not very good at all. And so Shantytown in that sort of deck is similarly not actually very good. When they trip over themselves, it's bad, and when they don't, you're not really getting that much from it, to be honest. So let's consider putting a couple more action cards into our deck. So let's say you have, roughly 50% thereabouts of action cards. So in a 5-card hand, you're expecting 2 or maybe 3 actions, and maybe 2 non-action cards. So an example of a deck like this might be one that didn't get to trash all of its starting cards, so you've still got all of these non-actions sitting around. Well, Shantytown's a little bit better in these sorts of situations. You're more likely to actually find 2 other actions to actually play it with, and even if you don't, you're somewhat more likely that you might actually get a chance to play it for draw as well, because you don't have to worry about all 5 cards in your hand. You've only got 1 or 2 other action cards that you need to deal with before you get to play the Shantytown for draw. So so Shantytown, you've got that sort of area where you don't want your actions to be too low and have too few of them, but at the same time you don't want to have too many, because if you're crammed full of actions, you're just never drawing with Shantytown. So playing off of this, there is a opener that you can do with Shantytown where you buy it as one of your opening cards. Now, normally you wouldn't try to open with a village, because villages only want to be paired with their action cards, and you don't have any. But if you want to hit 5 as soon as possible, and you're hoping to eventually have some Shantytown in your deck anyway, opening with it can be fine, and especially if you open it with a silver, because you want to hit 5. And that's because Shantytown if you have no other action cards, you're guaranteed to get the draw. And as we've explained before in other videos, at that very early stage where your deck is mostly made out of coppers, drawing 2 cards is almost equivalent to a silver. Not quite, but you can get 1 or 2 money from it. So that is actually helping you to hit 5 by giving you, bigger hand size. However, once you start adding some other actions, particularly terminal ones, then that low action density sort of deck that I talked about before, where Shantytown isn't very good, you are going to have to go through that stage. And so you will start adding cards like Workshop or something, I don't know, or some important 5 cost terminal action, like let's say your only trashing is Trading Post, right? It's terminal, it costs 5. You've opened with Shantytown and silver to try and get it as soon as possible, but now every time you draw your Shantytown with your Trading Post, the Shantytown is completely useless, right? So you've now got this like dead card floating around in your deck for a little while until you start to get a better deck that's a little bit more functional. But you do have the Shantytown already, and sometimes that's going to be better than like opening with 2 silvers or whatever. So let's get to the real meat of why you're here, which is how in the world do we actually manage to consistently get the +2 cards from Shantytown? And in order to do that, you need a deck where you have a lot of flexibility in how you can play the action cards in any order, and that includes your terminals. So bear in mind that if you don't have any terminal actions at all, then the question arises of why in the world are you buying Shantytown? So you could probably get away with 1, but if you have more than 1 Shantytown in a deck with no actions, then the Shantytowns might just start tripping over each other, and it's not like you're making use of the plus actions anyway. So more than 1 Shantytown in a deck with no terminals is very, very questionable. So we will consider, for purposes of this, that actually there are terminals that you want to be playing. So if you have a deck with other villages and not too many Shantytowns, these are the ones that make the most out of drawing with Shantytown. And the reason for that is because you need to have the flexibility of plus actions in your deck to actually play your terminals before you play Shantytown. Not all of them, but you're going to want to, at least reasonably often, be able to play all of the other action cards in your hand first before you play the Shantytown. That's sort of what you're really aiming to do when you try to get the draw from Shantytown. Now, terminal draw decks are the type that tend to struggle with getting draw from Shantytown, and that's because to get them out of your hand, you've got to play them, and then they draw you more cards. And by doing that, they might actually draw you more action cards, and in that case, well, now you've got more actions that you're trying to deal with before you get to play your Shantytown, and eventually it will hit the stage where you have so many terminals in your hand that you just have to play the Shantytown without actually getting the +2 cards from it, because you've got all these other terminals. So you're sort of looking for decks where the draw might be non-terminal, or you've got like non-terminal action cards and so on. We'll take a look at a number of things now. So first thing that's really nice is having lots of flexibility in where you get your plus actions from. So villager tokens from Renaissance expansion, Coin of the Realm from Adventures, the plus action token from Adventures as well, on some sort of terminal payload, like say the aim of your deck is to play lots of bridges, and you can put like Lost Arts on bridges. These will work very well with Shantytown, and the reason for this is because in the plus action token example, you get to play all of the bridges first, and with villager tokens, again, you get to play them all first. And Coin of the Realm, well, I guess again, same thing, right? You get to play the terminals in an order that you normally wouldn't. If you consider a lot of decks, you're trying to play like all your villages first, and then you're trying to play all of your terminal actions. Having the ability to play one of your villages after the terminal actions is the flexibility that you need to draw with Shantytown, right? Because you've got to play the Shantytown last. So you want to watch out for things like this. Other things are non-terminal stock cards. So because these cards do not draw, but they are non-terminal, they won't be accidentally finding other action cards that get in the way. So if you have festivals, and I've put an example here of Coven from Menagerie, like +1 action, +2 coins, and then it's sort of a cursor. These can be nice in that they are action cards that you can just play first and get out of the way. And Festival is quite nice because it lets you play some other terminals as well. Each festival you play, there's another terminal that you can then play and get that out of your hand before you have to eventually play the Shantytown. Draw to X engines, so think of cards like Library. Those can be nice in that to some way they offset the disadvantage of not drawing with Shantytown. So the same way that Festival really likes Draw to X, Shantytown is sort of like the poor man's festival, like literally poor man's festival because you're not generating any money with it. And Draw to X can offset that. But you want to watch out because not all cards that we consider Draw to X do actually get that much help. So if you think about Minion, I know this is not true Draw to X, but it's a card that I say you build fairly similarly to Draw to X. So you might think that Shantytown's going to be pretty good in a Minion deck, but if you compare it to a regular village, you actually do draw less with Shantytown than you do with Village. As long as you have, say, another minion in your hand, we will assume you're always finding another minion. You know, when you play Shantytown over a regular village, you are just drawing one less card. So it's not actually very good in that sort of deck, at least compared to another village. I wouldn't pick up Shantytown instead of another village just because there's something like Minion on the deck, or even just because there's Draw to X, right? Like the Draw to X offsets the disadvantage, but it's not actually an advantage to play it in a Draw to X engine. You're not actually like drawing any more as a result compared to using a regular village. Now, you might think that discarding and top decking are going to be good for Shantytown, but this is not necessarily the case. So you might think to yourself, well, if I can top deck the other actions in my hand, then I get them out of my hand and then I can play Shantytown and draw them back up again. And that is true, but not all top decking is actually going to be that useful. So if you think about Artisan from the base game, that's a card you gain something and then you get to top deck something from your hand. But the problem is that a lot of the time when you play Artisan, you're going to be gaining an action card with it. So although you are top decking an action card, you're gaining another one in its place, and so it might not actually be working out for you like you had envisioned. And similarly, Courtyard is a terminal draw card, so even though it will top deck stuff, you are drawing more every time you play it, and you might just draw more actions, and now it's not actually getting any easier for you. Discarding as well. Normally when you think about these cards that like you to have few other cards in your hand, you think, oh, discarding stuff is pretty good. But this is not the case with Shantytown, because a lot of the time you do actually want to play those other actions. And if you're just discarding the other actions to draw with Shantytown, then you're not actually playing those other actions, and that's not really helpful, right? You bought Shantytowns usually because you want to be playing lots of actions, and so discarding them just so you can draw with the Shantytown can be a little bit counterproductive. Another concept that I call a spent terminal. Sometimes you have action cards and they're terminals, and they're going to do something for you that's really good, but they've only really got a short lifespan, and then you stop playing them. So the traditional example will be good trashers like Chapel. Chapel, you put it into your deck, it's a terminal card, you trash a load of stuff, and then at the end of it, all your starting cards are gone, and now you just have this Chapel that's sitting around in your deck, and it's not doing anything. Well, the problem here with Shantytown is that every time you draw that Chapel, well, you've got this Chapel in your hand now, and it's an action card. And sure, you can play it and then trash nothing, but the problem there is that, you know, you're wasting an action on this Chapel in order to just do nothing with it, just to get your Shantytown to work. So it's kind of offsetting a little bit the benefits of trying to draw more with Shantytown. You got to get more villages just to accommodate this Chapel that you've got left in your deck, just so you can draw with Shantytown, right? What a pain. Fool from Nocturne is another example. It is a card, you play it, and it gives you a state card, and now you're getting this effect at the start of every turn. But the Fool itself isn't necessarily doing anything anymore. You might play it, and it does absolutely nothing. So that's another sort of example. And, you know, there are things like Flag Bearer, for example, but I haven't really listed them all. But mostly it's going to be terminal trash cards. So while I said that Chapel, you do get the option to not trash any cards when you play it, this is not actually the case with a lot of terminal trash cards. So if you think about something like Trading Post, when you play Trading Post, you must trash 2 cards from your hand. And now you might not always be at a good spot to actually do that. And in that case, it really is just going to block you from drawing with your shantytowns now that you've drawn it, because you just cannot get away with playing it because you've got to trash the cards that you want. So, yeah, it just... Shantytown just stops working as soon as you draw it, and you can't do anything about it. So do watch out for those. Similarly, you might sometimes have action cards that you just struggle to play at the right moment, even if you do have the spare actions. So a card like Remodel, you want to pair that up with something like, say, your estate. And if you don't have your estate in your hand, then maybe you don't really want to play that Remodel right now. But it's getting in the way of making your Shantytown draw. So, that stinks for you. So, as you can see, there's a lot of reasonable cards, especially ones that you want to build in an engine, that just sort of get in the way of Shantytown and really just stop it from working. And that's sort of why in a lot of decks, Shantytown isn't actually really going to be drawing very consistently, because you're just going to have cards like this and they're just in the way. And there's nothing you can do about it, right? That's it, your Shantytown, it's just not going to draw anymore. Something that I did just want to mention that's a little bit unrelated, the plus card token. So in Adventures, you have this plus card token that you sometimes get to put on a card, and it makes a card draw at the start of when you play it. So you would usually look to place it onto some card that you have a lot of copies of, and you might think to yourself, well, Shantytown, I've got all these Shantytowns because I need the actions, but I'm not drawing anything. So what if I put the plus card token on Shantytown? Now it's going to act like a regular village. And that sounds pretty good, and it can be. But you've got to watch out, because with Shantytown, the plus card token might actually hurt you sometimes. So if you actually do end up in a situation where you have no other action cards in your hand and you actually get to play the Shantytown, where it would give you plus 2 cards, if you put the card token on it, it will now draw you 1 card before that happens. And if it drew an action card, you will now fail to get the plus 2 cards bonus. And in this case, what's happened is that putting the plus card token on the Shantytown has actually caused you to draw 1 less card instead of 1 more, right? It's entirely counteracted the effect. In fact, worse than that. And you've actually sort of harmed yourself at that point. This means that putting the plus card token on Shantytown is not always going to be as good as it seems. Some of them you're actually not going to get any benefit from, and it will actually undo the benefit of your plus card token. So do watch out. I'm not saying that you should never put the plus card token on Shantytown, but sometimes it's actually going to be a little bit worse than you might think. And lastly, I just wanted to bring up a particular notable interaction with Shantytown. So this card Patron from Renaissance works really, really well with Shantytown, and the 2 cards complement each other very well. So first of all, Patron gives you villagers, and villagers are really nice with Shantytown because they let you play your terminals out of order, which includes Patron, and so you get more opportunities to play Shantytowns last. Usually when you open with Patron, you're going to end up with a small number of villagers sitting in your deck for a while, and so you might get better opportunities to just play Shantytown because you had that Patron. But another thing that Shantytown does that's really nice for Patron is that it reveals your hand every time you play it. And Patron, if you reveal it with a card using the word reveal, it will give you plus 1 coffers. So if you had, say, for example, this deck where you drew a hand and it was 2 Shantytowns and 3 patrons, well, you get to play your first Shantytown and get 3 coffers. Then you get to play all of the patrons, and you will actually, because you had a village that you just played, you'll get some spare villagers from that. And then you get to play your last Shantytown when it's the last card in your hand, and you will draw 2. So you get all these sorts of benefits between Patron and Shantytown when they work with each other. And sometimes you're going to give yourself these choices of do I play the Shantytown and generate some extra coffers and forego the draw, or do I play the patrons first and use the villagers to help me get the draw from Shantytown but give up getting the coffers? And so there's a lot of flexibility with those 2, and you get a lot of options on what to do, and it works quite well. So that's like one Shantytown combo that really gets to take advantage of what Shantytown's trying to do. So overall, just a summary here. Sometimes Shantytown is just a bad village. It's not going to draw you any cards. It's worse than regular village. if you have a lot of flexibility and control over how you get to play action cards in your deck, then you will get the draw more consistently. This includes just having other, more typical villages. And it gets in the way of itself, so usually you don't want too many copies of it if you're hoping that you're going to actually be able to draw with it more often than not. So that's it for Shantytown. What we're going to do now is we're going to head over to the online client, and we are going to generate some random kingdoms. And we're going to see how well Shantytown does in these kingdoms. Here we have nobles, festivals, and Shantytown as villages, and these are all non-drawing villages. And the only draw... Well, no, there is nobles. I was going to say witch, courtyard, steward, these are only +2 cards, but no, there is nobles that actually gives you +3. So we do have an engine with like Shantytown and nobles, or like festival and nobles. We can trash pretty well with sentry and steward. There is cursing that we're going to do, but we should be able to keep on top of it pretty easily. And I think it makes sense on this kingdom to just draw a lot with nobles. And how good is remodel? It's all right. Sorry, there are children singing outside. I don't know if you can hear that. We will need to buy some golds, but we might have some festivals and we get to generate some money. I want to buy some golds because I'd like to remodel later, but I actually might be able to just remodel some of my nobles instead really late. So that's it. This is a traditional engine, and I'm going to open with steward and probably not with Shantytown, probably steward and a silver, I guess. And I might get some Shantytowns because, it's cheap, but I'd much rather have festivals. But, the cards that I want are fairly expensive. And with all the buys from festivals, maybe sometimes it might be easier to just get Shantytowns. I'd much rather be playing my nobles for draw rather than rather than for actions. So Shantytown's okay here. You're going to get some. It's not super exciting, but you need a village. It's worth building the draw engine. If somebody doesn't build the draw engine, they just get demolished with curses, so they have to do it. Here, Shantytown is the only village, and the only draw is steward, which is not brilliant. We do have... Well, there's steward for trashing, so we can get thin, and we do have conspirator. So playing conspirator is nice, but how are we going to actually get started with the conspirators? Well, there is harbinger. And you know what? We've got workshop, so we can get a lot of conspirators, we can get a lot of harbingers, and we can just draw with that. We can ignore bandit in that case because we don't care for money. Lurker doesn't seem good because drawing is hard and workshop gets us all we need. The only non-4 cost is bandit that we don't really want here. Everything is cheap. Shantytown, we're probably just not going to bother with it. I think we can get away with steward for trashing, and then we swap over to workshop, and we just gain a lot of harbingers and conspirators, and we just draw up to 8 fairly consistently, and we buy a province. And I think that's it, and I think we can actually get that kicked off early enough and easily enough that it is actually worth doing. What's the other strategy that we do here? We're only going to really be able to do some sort of like big money, but steward big money is not very good. Bandit big money is not very good. I think the conspirator deck is going to do better, but because draw is so limited, we just aren't going to be playing with Shantytown, and effectively there is no village. Like, Shantytown's very hard to use here. You wouldn't really want to use it in a big money deck with bandit, I don't think. I mean, you could, in theory, open Shantytown and... bureaucrat? You'd just do silver and you'd go bandit, but I don't think that's good enough. I think we are okay to just trash with steward, and we open steward and we open workshop maybe, and we just always play the steward to trash over playing the workshop, and we start getting harbingers and then conspirators, and we just kick off this and we go for provinces. I think that's it. So I think Shantytown can't be used there because it's a non-drawing village. In any situation we'd want to use it, and that's just not good enough because the draw isn't there. So otherwise you'd only have to play it to draw with steward, and there's just no point. So here we have laboratory to draw, we've got council room to draw, we've got patrol to draw, we've got minion as an alternative form. Now we do have festival, instead of Shantytown. We've got Workshop and Ironworks, but what are they gaining? Pawns, Shantytowns. So these are both not actually very good on this board. What we really want to do is hit 5 as often as possible, and then it's a question of would we rather go for a minion stack or would we rather go for laboratories, festivals, patrols? Probably that instead of council room. I think patrol is actually okay here. I think that, there is no trashing, so the drawing is not spectacular, and I think it's actually all right that patrol lets us draw like our estates and victory cards, and we do actually have cellar that we might be able to make use of. Really, though, in this deck, we just want to be hitting 5. And maybe we open Silver and Shantytown, and it's actually okay to just have a Shantytown because we want festivals and laboratories. Even if the first 5s that we're buying are just laboratories, well, we're still actually going to be able to play that one Shantytown. We can always get down to playing it last. And then eventually we will be adding some patrols and some festivals, and I think having exactly one Shantytown will do well. I think that engine is going to be better than Minion, because the Minion, well, it has Pawn to get plus buy, but because there's no trashing, I think Minion's actually going to struggle a little bit compared to getting a bunch of labs and some patrols. You're not necessarily looking to draw your whole deck, which is why I think that just going for more of these draw cards is going to be better than Minion overall. And, you will just then be buying provinces now and then when you get it. So I think this deck can handle exactly one Shantytown, and it's okay. And it will have some use later when you're going to be playing a patrol, but you're not actually going to have that many patrols. You do really want laboratories, are quite nice. But you will get a patrol at some point, and then, hey, you have a Shantytown. So, yeah, it's all right as an opener, Shantytown there, I think. But, there's not that many terminal actions that you actually want. Here we have Regular Village and Shantytown. We have Masquerade to trash as well as Moneylender. Our draw, we have Courtyard and we have Council Room. Now we have an Artisan that can pick up a whole load of minions, and actually I think that's okay. I think going for Minion as draw is nice because we have Conspirator, and because Minion is a non-terminal action, it helps us to kick off our Conspirator chain. So I want to open with both Masquerade and Moneylender and start trashing. And sometimes they'll collide, and, well, whatever, we'll play whichever in that case. And we want to get an Artisan, and we want to get some minions, and we will at some point pick up villages. But honestly, I think Regular Village is going to be better than Shantytown here, because, we're going to be drawing with Minion, and it's going to help us about more easily with our Conspirators. And we are eventually going to get to a state where we have most of the cards, if not all of the cards in our deck, are going to be action cards until we start adding in provinces, because our money's coming from Conspirator. Now, if we want plus buy, we do need our Council Room. That's probably okay if we need that, but we are gaining with Artisan, and we can gain duchies. And maybe we don't really care to double province, but we probably could with enough minions if we gain them with Artisan. So I think we'll play one Council Room, and it draws. That's fine, because then you can play a minion, probably, draw with it, get your buy, play a load of minions as money, and then play one more to draw and undo that extra card draw for your opponent, so it works well. So Shantytown gets completely ignored here because Regular Village is just straight up better. This is not a deck for Shantytown. And there's not actually that many terminals. We will have a Masquerade, a Moneylender, which we'll eventually get rid of, a Council Room, and Artisan. So we're only ever going to have 3 terminals in our deck. We don't actually need that many villages. It would be nice to have some extras to help with Conspirator, but otherwise, there's just no point in Shantytown. We're not going to run out of the village. I don't think that pile's actually going to empty villages, so there's just no point in Shantytown. Just action high, so it's really bad for Shantytown. And here's the last one. We have Mining Village and Shantytown as villages. We have Trading Post as our only trashing, which is... it is trashing. Is it good trashing? Is Baron good here to help us hit Trading Post? I don't think so. How do we want to open on here, and what's our goal? What is the draw? The draw is Wishing Well and Diplomat. There's only one 5 cost. I don't know how good Lurker actually is here. How many things do we want? Well, how do we get plus buy? Well, there's only Baron. Well, there's Pawn as well. Okay. But it's not that easy. So we have got another village stack, and I think... So something interesting with Shantytown, actually, because there's Diplomat as a village. If you play a Shantytown and drop down to 4 cards in hand, then Diplomat will actually give you its village effect as well. So you could play a lot of terminals on this kingdom by doing that, but how many terminals are there really? Right, we want to have a lot of Wishing Wells, I think, and maybe we get a set of Lurkers to gain more stuff. Vassals are likely to hit, like Wishing Wells. You can go use Diplomat as like a moat, so you can get a lot of mining villages. I think in this case, actually, Lurker is all right because we've got Mining Village and we can blow them up and do Lurker tricks now and then. So I do actually want a Lurker, but I'm going to get Trading Post first, and Lurker's only going to be used for these basic cards after I've trashed down a bunch. So I'm going to open with Wishing Well, and maybe Baron is nice. Maybe it's nice to just keep an estate around and your Baron and hope to draw your deck and use it. I might actually open Wishing Well and Baron, I think. And I'm going to look to get a Trading Post as soon as possible. Maybe Baron's overkill, but I think it's all right because we're going to get all the silvers we want through Trading Post. It would be nice to play a Vassal with stuff like Wishing Well, because if your Wishing Well misses, you can then draw with you can draw it and play it with Vassal. So I think these 2 cards are nice, but we're going to need... Well, we've got plus buy with Baron, actually, so we might be able to get a lot of 3 costs. How good is Shantytown, though? We haven't really assessed this. I think it's worse than just like using Mining Village. I think Wishing Well might be able to draw, but we could just get some Diplomats and have Mining Villages. We're going to be gaining with Lurker, ideally, if we can draw our deck well enough. It's a bit of an awkward one, this. So what's the alternative to doing all of that? Like, is there actually a good big money card on this kingdom? And it doesn't really look like there is. I know Bureaucrat's pretty bad. You wouldn't really want a Baron, big money. Like, there's nothing else to actually do. You sort of really do want to try and build the engine. It's pretty weak, but I think it will do well enough. So Shantytown doesn't feel very good here. I think regular Mining Village is better because draw is limited, and it seems like it's quite hard to actually make use of Shantytown, but maybe you can have 1 or 2. Because there aren't actually that many terminals if you're taking out Diplomat. And if you're going to have like Mining Village, you may even occasionally get to use the Diplomat. If you can play a village, like use Trading Post and play a Diplomat, like it might actually get some extra village effect from it. So maybe you can make use of Shantytown because there's not actually that much demand on your plus actions, but it seems easier that you would just buy a Diplomat instead. Like, Shantytown feels very weak here, and making use of it doesn't feel super great. So, yeah, I just don't really see Shantytown being very useful here. I think if we're going to be doing anything else, we're going to be trying to draw with like Diplomat, Mining Village, Wishing Well, and so Shantytown doesn't really feel very good. Draw is hard. Drawing with Shantytown is hard. We can't really risk Shantytown being a stop card because draw is very tight here. So, yeah. So I think this is a bit lame for Shantytown. So there you go. That was Shantytown. It was pretty weak in a lot of those boards. We did sometimes make use of it, but it was very hard to get an engine where Shantytown was like really, really good draw. And this is pretty typical of Shantytown. It's just an awkward village, and sometimes Dominion throws these awkward cards at you, and you just sort of have to deal with it. And Shantytown's one of those. But, you know, as far as villages go, it does often tend to lose out to more typical villages, because a lot of the time it's just worse than those regular villages. So you buy the other villages instead. And that's it. That's it for Shantytown. So thank you for watching. I hope this was useful for you, and hope to see you again next time. Thank you and goodbye.